No civilization will forget the day humans finally snapped. "Who brings sticks to a space battle?" scoffed Captain Vern, standing on the bridge of the Thorax warship. He squinted at Earth's defense line, and there, scattered across the planet's orbit, were hundreds of strange metal rods. They looked nothing like the sleek ships of the Galactic Union fleet. No shields, no plasma guns, not even a single turret. Just crude, silent metal rods floating in space, unmoving. "This is an insult," muttered one of Varun's officers. "They really think they can hold us off with those?" Captain Varun grunted, though a slight unease gnawed at him. Humanity had a strange habit of being tougher and more resourceful than expected. They'd surprised the Union before using simple brute force methods. But as he watched the rods drifting lazily in orbit, his confidence returned. This defense was clearly an act of desperation. "This is going to be the shortest invasion in Galactic Union history," he laughed, his officers joining in, their laughter echoing around the bridge. Outside, the humans' rods floated aimlessly. A few Union scouts flew in close to examine the strange objects, only to find them completely unthreatening. No heat signatures, no power sources, no weapons, just hollow, empty shells that hardly counted as ships. In all his years, Varun had never seen such a poor attempted defense. As the fleet moved forward, forming up as they approached the edge of Earth's orbit, the warships glided quietly, surrounded by fighter ships ready for an easy victory. But just as they drew close, something strange happened. One by one, the metal rods began to shimmer, faint blue lights flickering along their surfaces. Captain Varun's expression shifted from smugness to concern as he saw sudden spikes in energy coming from the rods. Captain Varun's sensors flashed wildly. The rods weren't just empty shells. They were projectiles, and they were charging up. Full shields. Defensive maneuvers, now. Varun barked, his confidence crumbling. But his orders came too late. In the darkness, each spinning rod released a sudden, overwhelming burst of energy that shot out in every direction. The energy was chaotic, rough, and unrefined, yet it slammed into the fleet with the force of a cosmic hammer. Ships that once seemed invincible now sparked and shuddered under the raw power crashing into them. That wasn't plasma, gasped the weapons officer as his screen flickered. "What kind of weapon is that?" "Primitive," spat Varun, though his voice shook with panic. "It's just something raw enough to throw us off balance. These humans couldn't have perfected it. It's brute force. It's ineffective." But as he spoke, another wave of rods launched from Earth below. This time, they moved faster, slicing through space at a speed that even the Union's scanners struggled to track. These weren't the clumsy rods of the first wave. They were sharp, accelerating bolts, tipped with some material that absorbed energy signals. Silent and invisible, they appeared on the sensors only at the last second, streaking through Union shields and tearing through the hulls, igniting fires inside each ship. One Union vessel exploded, then another. Captain Varun stared at his screens, watching in shock as his once mighty warships tumbled through space, spilling metal and flames. This wasn't a mere defense. It was a relentless, calculated assault, and he had led his fleet right into it. Desperately, he activated the emergency communications link to the flagship. "Retreat. We need to regroup and reassess." But the reply from the flagship's commander was barely audible through the static and frantic shouts in the background. "Negative, Captain Varun. The human ground defenses have us locked. They've created some kind of field that's interfering with our systems. They're messing with our thrusters and the gravity itself," came the urgent voice over Varun's comms. As the captain tried to make sense of it, he watched in horror as another rod streaked past his viewport, moving as if fueled by the emptiness of space itself. It hit the side of the flagship, slicing through it as though it were made of paper, clean and precise. Varun had heard whispers about human technology, about their crude but oddly effective ways of using energy. But he had never imagined they could be this ruthless. They didn't bother with flashy lasers or grand displays of weaponry. No, they used their understanding of physics, energy, and gravity to turn their environment into a deadly weapon. The tactics were brutally simple, and the Union fleet, with all its advanced tech, had been completely caught off guard. "Humans have always been unpredictable," murmured his lieutenant, his voice barely above a whisper. Captain Varun turned and noticed, for the first time, the fear in his young officer's eyes. It struck him just how unprepared they all were for this level of merciless strategy. Earth was no longer a mere backwater planet on the galaxy's edge. It was a death trap, and with every passing second, it pulled them deeper into its grip. "No, we can still regroup," Varun said, though his words sounded hollow, even to himself. "They can't keep this up, they don't have the resources." But his voice trailed off as he glanced back at the view screen, where more rods still drifted, a seemingly endless supply of crude yet devastating weapons. Then the human spoke. A crackling transmission broke through the noise on the bridge, echoing through the hull. It was a human voice, calm and steady. "We warned you. We gave you chance after chance to leave us alone, but you didn't listen." The Union officers froze, each one turning toward the speakers, transfixed by the voice. There was something chilling about its calm, almost casual tone. "We don't need grand fleets," the voice continued. "We don't need a show of force. All we need is enough of these rods to remind you, enough to make sure you remember this day. This is your last chance. Turn back, or every single one of you will face Earth's wrath." Captain Varun could barely process the words, his mind racing. The Galactic Union had laughed off Earth's warnings, dismissed their pleas for peace, and scorned their requests for respect. But now the humans had finally had enough. With a gut-wrenching groan, the engines of the Union flagship sputtered, and then exploded, sending a shockwave rippling through the fleet. One by one, the remaining ships, once symbols of the Union's might, were torn apart by strange gravitational forces the humans had somehow triggered in orbit. These anomalies twisted and shattered the ships, leaving the crew helpless against powers they barely understood. As his own ship rocked violently, Varun clutched the console, feeling terror wrap itself around him. The humans weren't fighting with pride or ego. This was revenge, simple, unyielding payback. And it came with a cold finality that left no room for negotiation, no chance to retreat. Captain Varun knew, as his ship groaned under Earth's invisible grip, that he wouldn't survive to tell the tale. This day would never be forgotten, the day humanity finally snapped. Captain Varun struggled to stay upright as the bridge shook with each relentless impact of Earth's improvised weaponry. The humans had turned the battlefield into a nightmare, a scene no Union officer could have ever prepared for. Every attempt to stabilize the ship triggered a new wave of alarms and fresh damage reports across each console. The crew's once confident expressions had dissolved into dread. Varun could feel it too. The humans weren't fighting for victory or glory. They were simply making an example of the invaders. This can't be happening," whispered one of his lieutenants, eyes wide as he watched the scenes unfolding on the monitors. Outside, debris filled the void, pieces of what had once been the fleet's proudest ships, now drifting aimlessly, lit by the dim glow of Earth below. Chunks of what had once been the fleet's strongest warships now spun uncontrollably through space, illuminated by the faint glow of Earth below. Among the wreckage, those rods, those crude, vicious weapons, continued to slice through what remained of the Union fleet. What are we supposed to do, Captain?" the weapons officer asked, gripping his console. His voice trembled with desperation, cracking under the pressure that seemed ready to break every nerve in his body. Captain Varun clenched his teeth, forcing his own rising panic back down. "We hold our position. They'll run out of ammunition soon, they have to." But even as he said it, he couldn't shake the growing unease gnawing at him. The humans had planned this perfectly. Each rod had been placed with precision, lying in wait like silent sentries. They hadn't launched them blindly. They'd waited until the fleet was deep enough into their trap, making any chance of escape impossible. A transmission from Earth suddenly broke through the tense silence on the bridge. That same calm, unshaken voice filled the air. Your fleet has two options: leave our system immediately or face complete destruction. We are done with warnings. Varun slammed his fist onto the console. Enough, he shouted. But the human voice continued, unfazed by his outburst. It was as if they knew their words were the final authority, as if they understood that no amount of Union pride could change the grim reality they faced. Humans may not have your technology, the voice went on, steady and certain, but we've spent lifetimes mastering resilience, adapting to the worst our world can throw at us. You came here thinking we'd cower. A heavy pause settled over the transmission, each second thick, with unspoken consequences. But now you're seeing what happens when you push us too far. The transmission cut off, leaving a silence that weighed down on the bridge like an invisible hand tightening around Varun's throat. He could feel the message linger in the air, a tension pressing into him. "Sir," came the quiet voice of the tactical officer, almost afraid. "We're picking up a massive energy buildup on the planet's surface. It's targeting our coordinates." Varun's eyes widened. "How are they doing this?" he muttered, unable to grasp how a planet so primitive could generate enough energy to challenge an entire fleet. "They're improvising, Captain," the weapons officer replied, barely above a whisper. They're using their own planet as a weapon," whispered the weapons officer, barely able to believe the words. Before Varun could respond, another shockwave tore through the ship. The view screen flared as a blinding beam shot up from Earth's surface. This wasn't a focused energy weapon like those the Union fleet used. It was a massive, pulsing column of charged particles that tore through the nearest cruiser, reducing it to molten fragments within seconds. "That's impossible," Varun shouted, clinging to his console, his mind racing to comprehend what he'd just witnessed. "They're using the planet's magnetic field to amplify the blast." Despite himself, he felt a flicker of grudging admiration. The humans had taken their limited resources and turned them into a weapon, harnessing their very environment against the fleet. The tactical officer, pale-faced, leaned toward him. "Sir, we have to pull back. At this rate, there'll be nothing left of us. Retreat is not an option." Varun growled, though he wasn't sure he even believed his own words anymore. Every instinct screamed for him to abandon the assault, but Union doctrine allowed no room for cowardice. The Council had sent him here to crush humanity's spirit, to subdue this rebellious planet and make an example of its people. But now, he found himself caught in a trap that defied everything he'd been taught about warfare. Turning to his communications officer, he ordered, "Send a transmission to the other captains. We need to regroup." Before the officer could respond, another blast rocked the ship, this one closer, shaking the bridge so violently that the lights flickered. The communications officer was thrown from his seat, slamming against the wall as his console sparked and overloaded. "Damage report," Varun shouted over the chaotic alarms. The engineering officer looked up, his face ashen. "Shields are failing. Hull integrity is critical. We're losing life support in multiple sections." The bridge doors slid open, and Lieutenant Kerr staggered in, one of Captain Varun's most experienced officers. His uniform was stained and torn, and he struggled to catch his breath as he made his way to the captain's console, clutching a data tablet in his trembling hands. "Sir," Kerr gasped, his voice filled with urgency. We found something in the human transmissions. There's a message hidden in their signals. They knew we'd intercept it." "What does it say?" Varun demanded, snatching the tablet from Kerr's unsteady hands. Kerr swallowed, clearly shaken. "They're calling it a last warning, but it's more than that. They say if we don't turn back, they're ready to launch an even greater assault. They call it Operation Cataclysm." A chill ran down Varun's spine. The humans must be bluffing. There was no way they could have anything more devastating than what they'd already unleashed. But the look on Kerr's face said otherwise. Lieutenant Kerr was rarely rattled, yet here he was, practically pleading with his captain to reconsider. Varun looked around the bridge, taking in the faces of his officers. Fear shone in their eyes, a doubt that no amount of words could erase. They had all underestimated the humans, dismissing them as little more than an inconvenience on their path to galactic dominance. Now, they were facing the full fury of a species with nothing left to lose. The transmission from Earth crackled to life again, and the calm, unshaken voice returned. This is your final chance. Turn back. Leave our system and never return. We don't want to see any more of you here, ever. Captain Verne clenched his fists, struggling to hold onto whatever shreds of pride he had left. His ship, once a proud symbol of Union supremacy, now drifted battered and vulnerable, surrounded by wreckage. Yet, even in this moment of despair, he felt the weight of duty pressing down on him, the unyielding demand of his superiors to push forward, to never yield to what they deemed a lesser species. But as he tried to summon the will to fight, he realized they were out of options. The humans had stripped them of every advantage, every tactic, every ounce of control they'd once held over this battle. They weren't just fighting Earth, they were fighting something far larger, an idea, a force of nature that no technology could contain. Captain Varun looked out over his crew, each one silently waiting for his command. A thought gnawed at Captain Varun. Would his crew follow him into oblivion, or was it time to consider the unthinkable? He took a deep breath, glancing back at the shattered remains of his once mighty fleet. His next decision would define not only his legacy, but the fate of the entire Union. Captain Varun stood on the bridge, staring at the scattered remains of his fleet. Every ship that had once flown proudly beside him now drifted in twisted, broken silence. The humans hadn't dismantled them with advanced weapons, but with raw, calculated brutality. Varun's pride and sense of command were all that kept him rooted in place. But even he couldn't deny it any longer. Humanity had forced the Union to the edge of complete defeat. He tightened his grip on the console, his teeth grinding as he felt the weight of the decision before him. He had never known retreat, had never even considered it an option. But now he saw no other path. One final transmission flashed on his comms, and he accepted it, hoping to negotiate or at least buy time. The human voice returned, calm and resolute. Captain Varun, this is your last warning. Turn back now, or we will initiate Operation Cataclysm. Varun swallowed hard. What is Operation Cataclysm? He asked, his voice strained, his bravado shattered. It's the last option, replied the voice, steady and matter-of-fact. It's something we hoped we'd never have to use, but your persistence has left us no choice. Varun looked around the bridge at his officers, each one watching him anxiously, waiting for his response. He had led them here with full confidence in the superiority of Union strength, certain that this mission would secure their place in the galaxy as conquerors. Now, that confidence lay in ruins, as broken as the ships drifting outside. He made a decision then, one he knew would be difficult to explain to the Council. Open a channel to the fleet, he commanded, his voice steady, though he felt fear clawing inside him. His officers obeyed, their eyes wide with anticipation. This is Captain Varun. All ships are to fall back. Prepare for an immediate retreat from Earth's orbit. This battle is over. He could barely force out the words, but the look of relief on his officers' faces told him it was the only sane choice left. Pride had to be set aside to preserve what little remained of his fleet and his crew. The tactical officer quickly relayed the orders, and one by one, the battered remnants of the Union fleet powered down their weapons and began pulling back. The engines of the remaining ships flickered to life, their damaged hulls barely holding together as they limped out of Earth's orbital range. Captain Varun watched the screen, seeing the blue and green marble of Earth slowly shrink as they withdrew, like prey escaping a predator. Just as he thought they might escape unscathed, a bright flash caught his eye. Another transmission crackled through, but this time, the human voice was no longer calm. "This is what happens when you're given a chance to leave but choose to linger." The screen lit up with a brilliant wave of energy arcing from Earth, a final strike to ensure the Union fleet would never return. Massive beams, like tendrils of lightning, surged from the planet's atmosphere, locking onto every ship still within range. One by one, Union vessels began to explode, silent bursts in the void. Varun's own ship shook violently as energy ripped through its hull, tearing through metal and vital systems. "Engines at critical," the engineering officer shouted. "We're losing power. Shields are down." Varun gripped the console, his knuckles white as he fought to keep control. "Full retreat," he ordered, his voice rising over the blaring alarms, though he knew it was futile. More ships erupted around them, fragments scattering across the stars. His ship trembled violently, lights flickering as Earth's relentless energy beams tore into it. He felt the bridge shift, straining under the impact as systems overloaded. Panels burst into flames, consoles sparked, and the bridge plunged into chaotic darkness. Varun took one last look at Earth, looming below with a serene, menacing presence. This was not the simple world the Council had dismissed. Humanity was not a mere primitive race, but something more, something powerful enough to push even the strongest to the edge and force them into retreat. "Sir, the ship, it's failing," came his lieutenant's panicked voice over the chaos. Varun closed his eyes. He had underestimated humanity, and now, as the ship groaned under the immense force tearing it apart, he understood the true cost. Humanity's resilience was not something to be challenged lightly. Their patience was not infinite. They had shown mercy, offered chances to retreat, but in the end, they had forced him to understand that Earth was prepared to fight with everything it had. The bridge shook one final time, and Captain Varun's last thought was a reluctant admiration for the humans who had defied him. They had defended their world with ruthless efficiency, withstood the might of the Union, and shattered the perception that they were anything less than a force to be reckoned with. As his ship broke apart, Varun knew that no species would ever forget the day humanity finally snapped.